My name is Alan Niven, and you will find me in a brutally delicious frame of mind on a brutally delicious podcast with the brutally delicious Bruce.
One, two, three, four. The Brutally Delicious Podcast. The Brutally Delicious Podcast. The Brutally Delicious Podcast. The Brutally Delicious Podcast.
All right.
Good to go?
We can go. I'm just amused. I'm sitting here twiddling with a little machine that has actually got more capacity than they had at Abbey Road when they made Sergeant Pepper's.
That's crazy, right? And that record still
Isn't that
holds up
crazy?
as being insanely amazing, but however many years, 60 years later or something.
Do you love that record that much?
I do. I think I like Revolver.
For me-
Revolver might be. Oh no, Rubber Soul might be my favorite, but I do like that record. Yes.
Rubber Soul's the one that does it for me because that's the moment when they became artists as opposed to just entertainers.
And I think it's more emotional too, right? I mean, some of those songs tug at your heartstrings. I mean, especially the
Yes.
most obvious one, like My Life, right?
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. So anyway, let's talk about the book. Out tomorrow, right? How excited are you to have it see the public?
Not excited at all.
Nervous?
Apprehensive is the word I'd choose. And it reminds me very much of how I felt when a record was released that you'd written on and produced or something.
Right.
You have that apprehension of, will my baby be liked or will they say it's a monster?
Right. So how much headspace do you give to the naysayers? Because everyone's got an opinion and everyone's got a keyboard anonymously now, right? How much thought do you give to what they say?
Absolutely none.
Right. I would
And
think
that
you
has-
couldn't.
Yeah, and that has to cut both ways, Bruce. Back in the day, I used to discourage people I worked with from reading anything that was written about them because the negatives were probably wrong and the positives would probably be dangerous and lead to an excessive inflation of the head. My thing was, do not read your press. And
Right.
today I go, don't scroll down.
Right. I mean, because everyone's got an opinion now, and you could get yourself into a quagmire pretty quickly.
Well, it's not just that. And everybody's always had an opinion. The fact of the matter is everybody now has a platform for their opinion. And the sad thing is that most of them do it in a state of anonymity, that they don't put their real name up there, that
Right.
they just blast away out of the, and they're sitting in the dark basement of their parents' home, frustrated with life. So they're going to take out their baseball bat and take a whack at my kneecaps. No, thank you. Don't need it.
Right.
And
I think-
I was just going to say, because I think you were going there on those rails. If you have the presumption to sit and write something, and that presumption may even border onto the arrogant thought that what you're writing is going to be of any interest to anybody else, there is one absolute obligation, and the obligation is to be truthful. And I got a very interesting email from a guy called Mick Wall, who is about the only person who I think can write a really decent rock and roll book. And he said, "Welcome to the Authors Club." And of course, my response was, "Oh, get out of here. You've been doing this for years. You're at the apex of the medium. Don't be saying that to me." And And he said, no, you don't get off that easily. Welcome to the club, and it's a curse. Well, of course, I had to think about that for a moment, Bruce. It's a curse.
Right.
And then the penny dropped. The curse is that you have to tell the truth, and not everybody wants to hear it.
Right. No, that's true. But I think once you start, first of all, Mick Wall, that's from Mick Wall, that's the Pink Floyd.
He's done books on everybody. He's done Metallica, Led Zeppelin.
Gotcha.
He's done one on, at least one, Guns N' Roses. And he's mentioned by name in one of Axl's songs, where Axl invites him to quote unquote get in the ring, whatever that means.
Yeah, I remember those songs very clearly. But going back to what we were just talking about, I think once you start creating for your audience, you kind of lose the soul to it, right? It becomes less organic. Right, because if you're creating for what other people will think, you're not really creating from the depths of your soul, and it's not real.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, when you're writing, Bruce, it's a conversation with yourself, and for me, I think I was helped a little bit because I'd composed so many songs. I mean, there's 50, 60 under the Great White logo. But that's a technique where you're editing, because when you're composing a song, you've got a very, very small little box to put something into.
Right, like 3 minutes
so you're
or something.
Always
right?
editing. And if you've composed a lot of songs, you tend to hear things in your head with a certain small degree of musicality. You hear the rhythm of the words, the pacing of the phrasing, the note value of the vowels. So that's how I tend to hear things when I'm writing. So that, I think, helped me get words onto the screen. And I approached it from a point of view of make every little section like a track on an album, freestanding. You don't have to read the previous one to read the subsequent one, to read the one after that. They're all freestanding, like good tracks on an album. And if an album can sometimes be like a good book and stimulate your thought, or challenge your thought, or encourage your thought, then hopefully a decent book might be like a good album.
I agree. And it all comes down to, even if the songs are good too, though, it's got to be sequenced, right? I mean, you have to do the work to make it take you on a journey, an ebb and flow. Otherwise, it just singles, right?
Exactly. And I've been sequencing albums for years. Back in the day, when I was responsible for producing a Great White record, I used to know the tracking order before we even recorded note one.
Really?
And that was absolutely, and that was building into the process at least 2 tracks. So as you've got a little bit of fallback in case one doesn't realize in the studio. But for me, the art of making a record was to be found in pre-production, and pre-production. Know every note and every beat before you record. Then you're looking for energy and performance and conviction and happy accidents.
Right.
The things that happen and the key to that too was I'd always keep a reel of half inch running all the way through the session, because you knew that when somebody did something unexpected, you went, "What was that?"
Right. Lightning in a
They'd
bottle.
turn around and go, "Yeah." They'd turn around and go, "I don't know. I've forgotten already." So you'd have it on tape.
Right. Okay. So is sequencing an album similar to the putting together a book, or a book like this one?
Yes, because I treated every section as a track. And in the book, actually, when it's over and you get past the acknowledgements, there are the album notes that you would have on the sleeve.
Right. I think so much of that is missing from modern culture, I guess, because I mean, it was a whole process, right? You sit down, you read the lyrics, you read who mixed it, you read, and then you read who they, you don't even know these people, but you read who they thanked and all that kind of stuff. And it was all like this big ritual. And now we have 30-second clips and people have zero attention spans.
Bruce, big ritual. It used to involve some Packy Black and a packet of Rizzlers and a little bit of tobacco, and you'd be rolling a joint, and
Right.
you'd have the out sleeve 12 by 12 perfectly sized for that ritual.
Yeah. So how did this book come about then? I mean, how long was the process and how did you decide to do it?
Oh, I'm sure you can imagine that
You've
over
got
the
stories?
years, I've been asked time and time again, when are you going to write your memories?
Right.
And I'm not a fan of rock and roll books because they all have the same story arc.
They do.
So
That's very true.
that didn't encourage me. And eventually nagged. I actually did try writing a typical book. And I say typical because it had a chronological historical narrative or a historical chronological narrative, whichever way around you want to put it. And I found it tedious and depressing and a chore. And I wanted to stop and I wanted to have somebody to blame. So I sent it to someone thinking, oh, they'll come back and say, they're not happy about this. And I'd have an excuse to put it on a shelf.
Right. To not do it.
And better, I'd have somebody I could blame.
Right.
This person turns around and says, oh, book's great, finish it. And I'm like, oh, God, bye. So I put it on the shelf. But there were a couple of people who were utterly persistent in nagging. And one of them is located in the UK and oversees a series of magazines. So he deals with writers every day. And if he kept on my ass the way he did, I felt, well, maybe I should give it a go.
Okay.
Maybe I should give it a shot. But I've got to do it in such a way that it's not depressing to me or a chore. I didn't want to have to come in at 6:30 in the morning and do X number of words.
Right.
And then I've done my work for the day. I wanted to do it when I felt like it and deal with what I felt like dealing with at that time. So that lends itself to each section being freestanding and indivisible. And just eventually I got a clear perspective. I'm old, crotchety, and in the way. And they tend to push me into the corner of the kitchen where I sit as an old jukebox. And they come along and put a quarter in, and I tell a story of an evening. And if they put another quarter in, maybe I'll tell another story, a quarter being maybe a glass of Graham's port, which I'm rather fond of. So having that perspective of you're just an old jukebox also lent it to you're playing singles. So treat each story, each section like it's a single.
Okay.
And that was the section.
So book Sound and Fury rock and roll stories. How did you choose those stories? Because I imagine in your career you've got millions of stories. How did you like narrow it down to or filter through the ones that made this book?
With not much thought.
Really?
Yeah, no. It was a case of what can I remember today and what am I in the mood of dealing with? And I have a really good friend who lives 100 miles away in Phoenix, and we talk almost every night on the phone. And occasionally I'd bounce stuff off him and see what his reaction was. And if his reaction was, oh, that should be in the book, I'd make a note and go, got to go back and think about this and maybe put it up. I got an email from my publisher that instructed and demanded that I deliver 60,000 words.
Jesus.
Which I thought, yeah, that was my reaction.
I don't know what that translates to pages, but that sounds long.
Oh, tediously long. Now, I'm not that much of a genius on the computer, so I hadn't figured out that you could actually get a word count of a manuscript that you're forming. So I eventually figured this out and found that I had just over 60,000 words, which blew me away because I didn't think it was that much. I didn't think I'd written that much. So at that point, I went, done. Take your 60,000 words, put a cover on it, put it in the store, put it in the airport where hopefully people will buy it. So that was a nice surprise.
That's great. So were you ever worried about telling some of the stories that maybe you shouldn't, or you might ruffle some feathers down the road? Or that wasn't even a thought?
I can't say it wasn't a thought, but what I can say is I chose not to commit to the screen some stories I could have written that I felt were maybe beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. There were some that I went, no, I'm not going to be the one to put that out there.
Right. It doesn't serve any purpose probably at some point.
Some of the stories might, in the telling of them, might have been perceived as being mean-spirited.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes sense.
Now, yeah, I don't think I was mean-spirited. I don't think I was bitter. I think I was employing a certain English sense of humor. You got to go to the quote at the front of the book, Bruce. It's Macbeth. And it gives me an opportunity for a little bit of, what's the word? Taking a little bit of the piss and vinegar out of myself, because I'm just an old idiot telling tales about fools who generated sound and fury.
Right.
That means nothing. That it's all just us, a bunch of misfits. And just to make sure everybody got the point, I made the observation, rock and roll is God's occupation for the unemployable. So we're a bunch of misfits trying not to have a real job, not to be a working stiff, not to have to be a lawyer, not to have to be an accountant. We all chose to avoid working for a living. We wanted to play. So we're just a bunch of fools who are making a lot of sound and fury. And it signifies nothing, maybe. But on the other hand, it's Macbeth. And of course, if you're going to write, you're going to check in with Will Shakespeare. Because Will Shakespeare is the person who nailed human psychology hundreds of years ago with incredible accuracy and consistency. So by using a Macbeth, I'm also going, you might find a crazy wife or two in here. Maybe some witches. There could be some betrayal. There may be some people who are making power plays in this.
Right. What's been the response to the people that are in these stories? Have they reached out to you after reading any of it, or has it not been? Is it too early?
Too early. There have been some people who, most of the people who have got early copies are people who hopefully will be kind enough to read it and then go on their site and say it's actually worth reading. So that's the majority of people who have read it so far. And I would have to say that so far people have been really, really kind about it and said it was entertaining. And that's, I mean,
I 100% agree, and I think Marina nailed it when she did the review. It's super entertaining, and as someone who grew up through a lot of the, the era that you were managing Guns N' Roses and Great White
Right.
or whatever, involved with them all.
Yeah.
It's great to revisit all those stories and to revisit that era with your stories or through your stories. That makes sense?
Makes total sense. In the book itself, I give a little list of references that if you enjoy the book and you maybe don't necessarily know everybody in the book, here's videos and here's songs and here's books that you might want to read.
Right.
And two of my favorite rock and roll books are actually oral histories. It's not somebody putting their stamp and analysis of event and character on it. It's oral history. And one is I Want My MTV, which is hilarious.
Not
And
read
the
it,
other
I'll
one
check it.
is, oh, and the other one is Nothing But a Good Time, which Richard Beinstock put together. And that's another oral history. So it's comedy to it, people in their own words, making you laugh.
Yeah. But I think I
And of course,
identify with the whole thing way more, maybe, or maybe like some of your viewers, because that was my formative years. You know, I mean, like I remember standing in line to get Use Your Illusion 2, and I remember seeing Guns N' Roses, you know, pre-make when they used to wear makeup in the club scene, and that was, you know, my scene. So it was really interesting to read that stuff.
really, Bruce, how old are you? You don't look that old.
57.
Oh, good God. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because you definitely don't look
Well,
57.
thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know what I'm doing, but yeah, you know, I grew up through all of that. I remember, you know, standing in line for those records and standing in line for those tickets and doing that thing. And it's cool to see it. Even Great White, they've been on the show before too, but those guys are great. And, you know, I was a big fan. And so hearing those stories or reading those stories is pretty cool.
Well, I think there's another justification and qualification to it, Bruce, in that I think it's fair for me to look around at the moment and going, I hate to say this, but there seems to be a sense that the 80s and the late 80s may have been an apex of rock and roll.
And you're preaching to the choir, brother.
Because it's been pretty rotten since then. And I'll tell you, back in the day, Bruce, I used to have a problem with, what do they call it? Imposter syndrome. You know, because when I was growing up, it was John Lennon,
Right.
and it was Mick and Keith writing great records,
Right.
and it was Santana, and. So by the time that I'm getting into a functional position in the late 80s, there's a part of me that's going, you know what, fucker, you snuck in the back fucking door through the kitchen and you're standing in the same room as demigods and giants. They're going to come and tap you on the shoulder in a moment and tell you to get the fuck out. You're not invited to the party. You know, and that would cross my mind. But now, 30 years later, I look back and I say, you know, I think we acquitted ourselves pretty good. We constructed some worthwhile catalogs. The Great White catalog is very broad and worthwhile.
Yeah.
Much more than almost all their contemporaries. And I can look back and say, okay, we did all right and we did good. And the other thing that you've got to give yourself a little bit of credit for is that from, let's say 1964 to 1974, the playground was being developed.
Yes.
In 1964, it was this lush, grassy meadow.
Right.
And then they came in and they cut the grass, and then they put down lines, and then they put up goalposts. You know, we're making the game have certain rules and so on and so forth. So by the time we got on the pitch, it was kind of brown and dusty and already been worked over. And what do we do to make it sound worthwhile and fresh? So I think we did okay, given that we had some big shoes to try and pretend to follow.
And I think that
today, there's nothing today. I mean, everything, the aspect of digital recording is anathema to me. It really is. That you auto-tune somebody's voice. No, you fucking don't.
Right. You
All
do
right?
it till you get it right.
For me, the perfection in recording lay absolutely in knowing which imperfections to leave in the recording.
Right.
There's your organic, there's your thing that's real. The tempo changes that people take out now with one touch of a
Yeah, but it
button
makes the
on a
music
computer.
breathe.
Exactly. It makes it alive and real,
Yes.
you know?
I know we're going to be running out of time here in a second, but I think you summed it up with that quote or that book title, "Nothing But a Good Time," right? Because that's how I equate that whole scene is nothing but a good time. And I think we would do well to sort of harken back to it because we're all living in these shitty, turbulent times, and you need that sort of escape, right?
You need that sort of escape. And you and I also had conversations, long conversations with people whose intelligence and sense of spirit we connected to, and where other people who were around us, say in our school or our family situation, who we just weren't making sense to us.
Right.
There were people on pieces of 7-inch plastic who were making sense.
Yeah.
And we need that. We need that kind of social leadership to come through again. But it's not going to do it being run by Michel Antony at UMG, for example, whose greatest skill is in preventing all those who created intellectual property in the last 40 years from getting paid.
Right.
You know, she gives them all away to streaming sites that UMG own. Oh, the streaming sites didn't pay us. They paid us a tiny little sliver of a crumb, so there's nothing for you,
Right.
you know. And they're making all the profit off the streaming sites. I mean, it's dreadful. It's disgusting. But you see, I think part of that is deliberate
Oh, yeah.
because artists have a knack of speaking truth to power
Yeah.
and putting power into truth. And I think those in it and run the world don't particularly want artists. I mean, they set the FBI on John Lennon and made files about him and Mick Jagger, by the way. There was an FBI file on Mick Jagger. What does that tell you? That Richard Nixon was genuinely afraid of what they were saying. When John said, "Give me some truth," Nixon hid under his desk.
Yep. Hey, I'm getting the bump from Jamie here. You probably saw it as well. I could talk to you all day, man. I love this kind of conversation.
I think we're all right for a couple more minutes.
Okay, I know. Jamie just bumped me, so. Jamie, can we go one more? I don't know. We'll go one more.
Yeah, go on. Go on.
Are you planning on doing any sort of book tour or readings or anything this as you go along?
I'm doing it right now.
It's true.
This
What
is-
about like
this is my
about,
book,
like,
book
audience?
tour. Having the pleasure to meet people I've never met before and talk about things that are close to my heart. That's a pleasure. So the book tour is through the screen. The idea of going to a local bookstore and hoping your family turns up to buy a book, it doesn't appeal to me that much.
Right.
I used to do installs back in the day. You remember those?
I do.
When we used to take a band. We'd take a band into Sam Goody's or somewhere.
Yeah, some record
and
store,
hope
right?
and hope that people would turn up. And I have to say, fortunately, because I was very reluctant to do them, most of the installs that I was involved with were okay. We had enough people come that it seemed worthwhile. But I've also looked at in stores and gone, oh, good God, you're sitting here for 3 hours for 18 people? I don't
Like
think
the
so.
Spinal Tap, right? Remember that scene in Spinal Tap? It was just them and Paul Schaefer, right?
Yeah.
Well, Alan, that brings me to
that movie. My favorite way of responding to people asking me about that movie was, what is so funny about a documentary?
right, not a mockumentary, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
documentary. And I'll tell you how close to home that was. Great White Night got lost underneath the circular stage of the Royal Court Theatre in Liverpool.
That's great.
When we were opening. When we were
Hello,
opening
Liverpool.
Yeah, hello, Liverpool. We were going around in a circle, and there's this old guy. We'd call people who worked in those kind of locations Jobsworth, because they would never do anything because it was more than my job's worth, mate.
Right.
And there was a Jobsworth sitting there in his uniform going, well, you go around there, and we'd come back around, and there he was again. And he's like, where's the fucking stage, dude?
That's great.
When I saw that movie, I went, I wonder who was watching us.
Right. No cameras back then everywhere, so.
No.
All right, Alan, I appreciate you taking the time. Maybe we can do this again because I could chat with you forever.
Oh, and anytime you want to hook up, just have a conversation. It'd be my pleasure. I enjoyed talking with you. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, thank you so much for your contributions to metal and the rock and roll world. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate all your contributions to the music world, and I definitely am going to follow up with you because I'd love to chat some more.
All right, let's do that.
Take care. Good luck with the book.